My uncle called at 3 a.m. Dad's in the garage with a shovel. You need to leave now. So I did. The phone screen lit up my dark bedroom with Uncle Derek's name at 3:17 a.m. I'd never received a call from him past midnight in my entire life. He lived 2 states away and only called on birthdays or holidays, always during reasonable daylight hours. My thumb hovered over the answer button while my brain tried to construct scenarios that made sense. Family emergency. Someone died. Mom had an accident. None of those explained the sick feeling already spreading through my stomach before I even heard his voice. I answered and heard breathing first, heavy and scared. Then his words came fast and low like he was hiding while he talked. Ethan, listen to me very carefully. Your father is in the garage right now with a shovel and contractor bags. Your mother isn't answering her phone. I need you to grab your sister, get out of that house immediately, and drive to the police station. Do not confront him. Do not ask questions. Just leave right now. The words hit me like physical objects, each one impossible and terrifying. Dad was in the garage, with a shovel. Mom wasn't answering. The connections my brain was trying to make felt too horrible to complete, too insane to be real. Uncle Derek had always been the paranoid one, the conspiracy theorist who saw danger everywhere, but something in his voice told me this wasn't paranoia. This was genuine terror, barely contained. How do you know this? I asked, still hoping for a rational explanation, because I'm parked across the street watching him through the garage window. I drove here because your mother called me 6 hours ago saying she was scared, and then her phone went dead. Now I'm watching your father dig, and Ethan, he's not planting a garden at 3 in the morning. Get Lily and leave right now before he comes back inside. I hung up and sat frozen in my bed, 17 years old and trying to process information that made no sense. Dad was a high school principal, the kind of man who volunteered at church and coached Little League. He'd never raised his voice at Mom, never showed anything but steady, boring reliability. The idea of him doing something that required a shovel and contractor bags at 3 a.m. was absurd. Except Uncle Derek was out there watching, had driven hours in the middle of the night because Mom had called him scared. I grabbed jeans from my floor and pulled them on over my boxers, hands shaking so badly I could barely work the zipper. My little sister Lily was 13 and slept down the hall, completely unaware that our uncle thought our father was dangerous enough to run from. I crept to my door and eased it open, listening for sounds from downstairs. The house was silent, except for the ambient hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the hallway clock. Normal night sounds. Nothing that suggested danger or crisis. I moved down the hallway to Lily's room and opened her door slowly. She was buried under blankets with her phone still glowing under the covers, probably texting friends despite the late hour. I approached her bed and clamped my hand over her mouth before shaking her shoulder. Her eyes flew open in panic, and she tried to scream against my palm. I leaned close and whispered directly into her ear, barely audible even in the silent room. Uncle Derek called. Something's wrong with Dad. We need to leave the house right now without making noise. I'm going to move my hand, and you're going to get dressed and follow me. Don't ask questions until we're in the car. She nodded against my hand, eyes huge with fear and confusion. I released her, and she sat up, reaching for clothes while I grabbed her backpack and started shoving in items from her desk. Phone charger, laptop, the emergency cash I knew she kept in her pencil case. She pulled on jeans and a hoodie, moving quickly but silently like she understood the gravity without needing full explanation. We couldn't go downstairs because that route led past the kitchen and the door to the garage. Instead, I led Lily to my room and opened my window, looking down at the 12-foot drop to the front lawn. Not ideal, but manageable with the porch roof providing a stepping point halfway down. I threw both our backpacks out first, watching them land in the grass, then helped Lily climb through the window frame. She hesitated at the ledge, looking down at the drop with visible fear. I gripped her wrists and lowered her as far as I could reach before letting go. She fell the remaining 6 feet and landed hard, but stayed on her feet. I followed immediately, dropping and rolling to absorb impact. My ankle twisted slightly but held my weight when I stood. We grabbed our backpacks and ran across the front lawn to where my car was parked on the street. My keys were in my pocket, one small mercy in this nightmare. I unlocked the doors, and we dove inside, and I started the engine with hands still shaking. Only then did I see Uncle Derek's truck parked 3 houses down with his silhouette visible in the driver's seat. He flashed his headlights twice, some kind of signal, then pulled out and drove away. I followed, leaving our house behind without looking back. Lily was crying silently in the passenger seat, her hands gripping the dashboard. What's happening? Where's Mom? Why did Uncle Derek say Dad was dangerous? I don't know yet, I told her, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline making my whole body shake. But we're going to find out. Uncle Derek's truck led us through empty streets toward the police station downtown. It was a 15-minute drive that felt like hours. Every red light, an eternity of not knowing. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Derek. Don't stop until you're inside the police station. I'm right behind you. The police station parking lot was nearly empty at 3:30 a.m., just a few patrol cars and one civilian vehicle. I pulled into a spot near the entrance and killed the engine, looking back to see Uncle Derek parking beside us. He climbed out of his truck, looking worse than I'd ever seen him. His face was gray, his eyes red-rimmed, and his hands shook when he gestured for us to follow him inside. The lobby was fluorescent bright and sterile, with a bored officer behind bulletproof glass reading something on his computer. Uncle Derek approached the window and his voice came out hoarse. "I need to report a potential homicide. My sister isn't answering her phone and I witnessed suspicious activity at her house. Her husband was in the garage in the middle of the night, digging and using contractor bags." The officer's expression changed from bored to alert. He picked up a phone and spoke quietly, then buzzed us through a security door. A detective appeared within minutes, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd seen every kind of horror. She introduced herself as Detective Lisa Brennan and led us to a small interview room with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs. Uncle Derek explained everything while Detective Brennan took notes. Mom's phone call 6 hours earlier saying she was scared of something but not specifying what. The way her phone went dead mid-conversation. Uncle Derek's decision to drive to our house to check on her. His arrival at 2 a.m. to find all the lights off except in the garage. His position across the street watching through the garage window as Dad dug a hole in the concrete floor, then lined it with plastic. The contractor bags stacked nearby. The methodical way Dad worked, like someone following a plan rather than acting impulsively. Detective Brennan's pen stopped moving, and she looked at Uncle Derek with an intensity that made my stomach drop. "You're saying he was digging into the garage floor? Not in the yard?" Uncle Derek nodded. "The garage floor. Like he was creating a burial space under the concrete. And my sister still isn't answering any calls or texts. It's been 7 hours since I heard from her." Detective Brennan stood abruptly and left the room, speaking urgently into her radio. Within minutes, the police station transformed from quiet night shift to active crisis. Officers moved with purpose, gathering equipment and speaking in codes I didn't understand. Detective Brennan returned and told us to stay in the interview room while they responded to the scene. She asked for our address and told us not to contact anyone, especially not our father. Lily was shaking beside me, her face white with shock. "This isn't real," she kept whispering. "Dad wouldn't hurt Mom. They love each other. He's the principal of a school. Everyone respects him." But I kept thinking about small things that hadn't seemed important before. The way Mom had been quieter lately, less present. How she'd started staying in the bedroom more, claiming headaches. The night 2 weeks ago when I'd heard them arguing in whispers, too low to make out words, but with an intensity that had made me uncomfortable. Dad's increasing control over Mom's schedule, his questions about where she'd been and who she'd talked to. Red flags I'd dismissed as normal marital tension. An hour passed with no updates, then 2 hours. Detective Brennan returned at 6 a.m. and her expression told us everything before she spoke. "We entered your home with a warrant. Your father was still in the garage. We found your mother. I'm very sorry." The words didn't make sense at first. Found her where? Found her how? But Lily understood immediately and started screaming, a sound of pure anguish that filled the small room. Detective Brennan continued talking, but I couldn't process the words through the roaring in my ears. Mom was dead. Dad had killed her. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with homework and attended every school event had murdered his wife and was in the process of burying her under the garage floor when police arrived. "Your father is in custody," Detective Brennan said. "He's being charged with first-degree murder. We found evidence suggesting this was premeditated. There are things we need to discuss about your safety and living arrangements. But first, I need to take formal statements from both of you about your family situation." The next hours blurred into a nightmare of questions and procedural requirements. Lily and I sat in separate rooms, giving statements about our family life, trying to remember any signs of violence or danger we'd missed. Child services got involved because we were minors who just lost both parents, one to murder and one to prison. Uncle Derek fought to get emergency custody, arguing he was the closest family and we needed stability. The police investigation moved forward with horrible efficiency. They'd found Mom's body wrapped in plastic in the garage, her skull fractured from blunt force trauma. Dad had apparently attacked her during an argument around 8 p.m. the previous night. He'd spent the next 7 hours methodically preparing to hide the evidence, digging out the garage floor and preparing the burial site. If Uncle Derek hadn't received Mom's scared phone call and driven to check on her, if he hadn't watched through that window, Dad might have succeeded in making Mom disappear. The media descended within 24 hours. High school principal murders wife and nearly gets away with it. Our house became a crime scene, surrounded by yellow tape and news vans. Reporters called our phones and showed up at Uncle Derek's house, where we'd been temporarily placed. Dad's photo was everywhere. The professional school picture that made him look respectable and trustworthy. The cognitive dissonance of seeing that familiar face paired with the word murderer felt insurmountable. The school district released a statement expressing shock and immediately placing Dad on unpaid leave. Parents who'd entrusted their children to his leadership now questioned everything. Had there been signs? Had he been dangerous around students? The district launched an internal investigation while criminal proceedings moved forward. Dad's arraignment happened 3 days after the arrest. Uncle Derek didn't want us attending, but I insisted on going, needing to see the man who'd destroyed our family. The courtroom was packed with media and curious onlookers. When they brought Dad in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, I barely recognized him. His face was hollow, his eyes empty. He didn't look at us, didn't acknowledge our presence in any way. The prosecutor outlined charges of first-degree murder with special circumstances, premeditation, lying in wait, attempted concealment of evidence. Dad's court-appointed attorney entered a not guilty plea despite the overwhelming evidence. Bail was denied given the severity of charges and flight risk. Dad would remain in county jail awaiting trial. As they led him out, he finally looked at me. The expression on his face wasn't remorse or grief. It was cold calculation, like he was trying to assess whether I'd be a problem for his defense. That look told me everything about who my father really was underneath the principal facade. The funeral happened while Dad sat in jail awaiting trial. Mom's side of the family came. People I barely knew who hugged us and said meaningless things about God's plan and better places. Uncle Derek organized everything because Lily and I were too shattered to function. I stood at the graveside service watching them lower Mom's casket into the ground and felt nothing. Shock had created a buffer between reality and emotion that would take months to break through. School became impossible. Everyone knew what had happened, had seen the news coverage, had formed opinions about our family. Some people offered sympathy that felt more like morbid curiosity. Others avoided us like murder was contagious. Teachers didn't know how to treat students whose father had killed their mother. I stopped going after 2 weeks, unable to face the stares and whispers. Lily withdrew completely, stopped talking except when absolutely necessary. Child Services and Uncle Derek's lawyer worked out temporary custody arrangements while the criminal case proceeded. We stayed with Uncle Derek in his small house 2 states away, displaced from everything familiar. Our belongings from the house arrived in boxes that neither of us could bring ourselves to unpack. Opening them meant accepting this was permanent, that we'd never go home again. The preliminary hearing came 6 weeks after the arrest. The prosecution presented evidence in a public courtroom laying out the timeline of Mom's murder. How Dad had struck her during an argument about divorce papers she'd filed that morning. How he'd wrapped her body in plastic and begun the burial process. How Uncle Derek's phone call had been logged at 9:14 p.m., 3 hours before Dad started digging, suggesting Mom had known something was wrong and reached out for help before Dad attacked her. Dad's defense attorney tried to argue the death was accidental, the result of a fall during a heated argument. But the forensic evidence contradicted that narrative. Multiple blunt force impacts to Mom's skull, defensive wounds on her hands where she'd tried to protect herself, the premeditated purchase of contractor bags and quicklime 3 days before the murder. Dad had been planning this, and Mom's decision to file divorce papers had accelerated his timeline. The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial and set a date 4 months out. 4 more months of living in limbo, waiting for a jury to confirm what we already knew. Uncle Derek enrolled us in new schools near his house, trying to establish some normalcy. I was a senior now, trying to finish high school while processing trauma that made concentration impossible. Lily was in 8th grade and failing every class, unable to care about homework when our mother was dead and our father was a murderer. Therapy became mandatory, court-ordered sessions with a psychologist who specialized in trauma. Dr. Rachel Kim had kind eyes and a gentle voice that never pushed too hard. She explained that what we were experiencing was complex grief, complicated by betrayal and the violent nature of our loss. She said healing wasn't linear, and we shouldn't judge ourselves for however we needed to cope. The sessions felt pointless at first, but slowly I started talking about the guilt. How I'd been in the house that whole night while Dad killed Mom and prepared to bury her. How I'd slept through her death, been completely unaware that the most important person in my life was being murdered 20 feet below my bedroom. Dr. Kim insisted there was nothing I could have done, that I wasn't responsible. But the guilt remained. Mom's phone records became evidence in the case. The prosecution subpoenaed them and discovered she'd been documenting Dad's behavior for months. Texts to her best friend describing emotional abuse and control. Photos of bruises she'd claimed came from accidents, but were clearly handprints. A pattern of escalating violence that she'd hidden from everyone, including us. Learning that Mom had been suffering in silence while I lived oblivious in the same house created new layers of guilt. I started going through my own phone, looking for conversations with Mom I'd dismissed or ignored, text chains where she'd asked how I was doing, and I'd responded with one-word answers because I was busy with friends or homework. Moments where she'd tried to connect, and I'd been too absorbed in my own teenage life to notice she was drowning. Dr. Kim said this retrospective analysis was normal but unproductive, that I couldn't have known what I didn't know. But knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally were two different things. Uncle Derek was struggling too, carrying his own guilt about not acting sooner. He'd received that scared phone call from Mom at 9 p.m. and had immediately started driving, but it was a 2-hour trip. What if he'd called the police instead? What if he'd told Mom to leave the house? What if he'd driven faster? The what-ifs consumed him during those months before trial, visible in the way he'd stare at nothing during dinner or wake up at night pacing the hallway. Detective Brennan called with updates as the prosecution built their case. They'd found Dad's search history showing him researching concrete cutting, body decomposition rates, and police investigation procedures. His work computer had deleted files they'd recovered, showing he'd been planning this for at least 2 weeks. He'd purchased the contractor bags and quicklime using cash at a hardware store 40 miles away, clearly trying to avoid creating a trail. The premeditation was so thorough, it suggested he'd been fantasizing about this for much longer. Learning these details felt like being punched repeatedly. Each new piece of evidence revealed a father I'd never known, a man capable of methodical planning to murder his wife and hide her body. The cognitive dissonance of reconciling the dad who'd taken me fishing with the monster who'd researched decomposition rates made my brain hurt. The trial began in November, 6 months after Mom's death. The courthouse was packed with media and spectators, drawn to the sensational nature of the case. Uncle Derek drove us there each day, though Dr. Kim had recommended we not attend. I needed to be there, needed to hear everything so I could understand how I'd missed the signs that my father was capable of murder. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented forensic evidence of premeditation, Mom's documented history of abuse, Dad's suspicious purchases in the days before the murder. Expert witnesses testified about the force required to inflict Mom's injuries, confirming this was no accident. The medical examiner explained how Mom had suffered, how she'd fought to survive, how Dad had continued striking her even after she was unconscious. Lily left the courtroom during that testimony, unable to listen. I stayed, forcing myself to hear every horrible detail. This was the truth of what Dad had done, and looking away felt like betraying Mom's memory. The defense tried to paint Dad as a devoted husband who'd snapped under stress. They called character witnesses who testified about his community involvement and professional reputation. Former students described him as strict but fair. Colleagues said he'd never shown signs of violence. But the prosecution demolished this narrative by presenting evidence of Dad's carefully maintained public persona contrasted with his private behavior. They showed texts where he threatened Mom, voicemails where he screamed at her, financial records showing he'd controlled every dollar she spent. The man everyone thought they knew had been a mask hiding someone capable of murder. Mom's best friend, Angela Reeves, testified about conversations where Mom had expressed fear, how Dad had installed tracking software on her phone without her knowledge, how he'd demanded access to all her passwords and email accounts, how he'd isolated her from friends by creating conflicts and then playing the victim when Mom tried to defend her relationships. Angela broke down on the stand, saying she'd encouraged Mom to leave, but Mom had been terrified of what Dad might do if she tried. That testimony hit me hard because Angela had been at our house countless times, had smiled at Dad and made small talk while knowing he was abusing her best friend. Why hadn't she called the police? Why hadn't she done more to help Mom escape? But I knew the answer. The same reason Mom had hidden the abuse. The same reason nobody had seen the warning signs. Dad was too good at presenting normalcy. The prosecution called a domestic violence expert who explained the cycle of abuse and why victims don't leave. She talked about escalating control, isolation tactics, and the statistical reality that leaving is the most dangerous time for abuse victims. 75% of domestic violence homicides happen when the victim is attempting to leave or has recently left. Mom's filing for divorce had signed her death warrant, and Dad had simply executed the inevitable conclusion of his years of escalating control. Dad took the stand in his own defense against his attorney's advice. He testified about his love for Mom, his shock at her divorce filing, his claim that her death was a tragic accident during an emotional confrontation. He cried on the stand, apologizing to us directly for losing control. The performance was convincing until the prosecutor cross-examined him. She asked about the contractor bags purchased 3 days before the murder, about the quicklime, about the hours spent digging a burial space, about his methodical cleanup of the crime scene, about the concrete saw rental, about the searches on his computer. Dad's explanations fell apart under questioning, revealing the premeditation he'd tried to hide. He claimed the bags were for yard waste. The quicklime was for a gardening project. The concrete saw was for a home improvement plan. But when pressed for specifics, his stories contradicted each other and made no logical sense. The prosecutor showed him his search history with timestamps. Searches for how long until a body decomposes happened the same day he bought the contractor bags. Searches for police investigation procedures after suspicious death happened 2 days before he attacked Mom. He'd literally been planning the murder and researching how to get away with it while eating dinner with us, helping with homework, coaching Little League. The mask had never slipped until that night in the garage when Uncle Derek had been watching. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with a guilty verdict on first-degree murder, I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction. Just the hollow confirmation that my father was a murderer. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. The prosecution asked for life without parole, arguing Dad's position as a school principal had been a position of trust that made his crime more egregious. He'd spent years teaching children about integrity and consequences while secretly planning to murder his wife. The defense pleaded for leniency, citing his lack of criminal history and potential for rehabilitation. The judge gave him life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. By the time Dad would be eligible for release, I'd be in my 40s. Lily would be almost 40. An entire lifetime stolen by his choice to murder rather than accept divorce. Victim impact statements came before sentencing. Uncle Derek spoke first, describing his sister's kindness and the hole her death had created in the family. Then it was my turn. I'd written pages about betrayal and loss, about the man I thought I knew versus the murderer who actually existed. But standing in that courtroom looking at Dad, I couldn't read my prepared statement. Instead, I spoke directly to him. You taught me that actions have consequences, that integrity matters, that we're defined by our choices. You chose to kill Mom rather than let her leave. You chose to try to hide her body rather than face responsibility. You chose yourself over everyone who loved you. I hope the next 25 years give you time to understand what you destroyed. Dad's face remained expressionless throughout my statement. No remorse, no emotion, just the same cold calculation I'd seen at his arraignment. He'd worn a mask his entire life, and even now facing life in prison, he couldn't show genuine feeling. Lily couldn't speak, too overwhelmed to face him. Uncle Derek read a statement she'd written about nightmares and broken trust, and wondering if anything about her childhood had been real. Living with Uncle Derek became permanent after the trial. He sold his house and bought a larger one so Lily and I could have proper bedrooms and space to heal. He changed careers to work from home so he'd be available when we needed him. He'd never planned to be a parent to teenagers, but he stepped into the role with dedication that probably saved our lives. The nightmares came every night for months. Dreams where I heard Mom screaming but couldn't find her. Where I walked into the garage and saw Dad with the shovel but was paralyzed and couldn't move. Where I opened the hole in the garage floor and found my own body instead of Mom's. Dr. Kim said the nightmares were my mind processing trauma, that they'd eventually decrease in frequency. She was right, but it took over a year. Lily struggled more visibly than I did. She started cutting, thin lines on her arms that she tried to hide under long sleeves. Uncle Derek found out when he did laundry and saw blood on her shirts. More therapy, more interventions, more attempts to pull her back from the edge of self-destruction. She blamed herself for not noticing Mom's suffering, convinced that if she'd paid more attention, she could have prevented the murder. Dr. Kim worked with her on reframing those thoughts, but belief in personal guilt was hard to shake. I finished high school through online courses, unable to face returning to the physical building where everyone knew my story. Graduation happened without ceremony or celebration. Uncle Derek took us to dinner and told me he was proud of the resilience I'd shown. It felt like hollow praise for surviving something that should never have happened. College applications asked about significant life experiences and obstacles overcome. I wrote essays about surviving my mother's murder and living with complex grief while maintaining academic achievement. Admissions officers probably thought I was exploiting tragedy for sympathy. Maybe I was, but the experiences were real, and they'd shaped everything about who I was becoming. I got into a good state school with a partial scholarship and majored in psychology, drawn to understanding the kind of mind that could plan and execute a murder. Dr. Kim said I was trying to understand my father by studying people like him. She was right. Every criminal psychology course, every case study of family violence was an attempt to find the explanation for why Dad had done what he did. But the more I learned, the more I realized there wasn't a satisfying answer. Some people were just capable of monstrous things while maintaining perfect facades. The mask wasn't hiding a monster underneath. The mask was part of who they were, as real as the violence they inflicted. Lily made it through high school by sheer determination. She got involved in theater, using performance as an outlet for emotions she couldn't otherwise express. Uncle Derek and I attended every show, cheering loudly from the audience while she transformed into different characters on stage. Those were the moments when I saw glimpses of the sister I'd had before that horrible night. The person she might have become if Dad hadn't destroyed our family. Dad sent letters from prison that Uncle Derek intercepted before we saw them. He'd ask if we wanted to read them, and we'd both say no. Whatever justifications or apologies Dad wanted to offer felt meaningless after what he'd done. Some people thought we were heartless for cutting him off completely, but maintaining a relationship with our mother's murderer wasn't something either of us could do. 5 years after the murder, Uncle Derek got sick. Cancer, aggressive and already advanced when diagnosed. The doctors gave him maybe a year with treatment. He'd sacrificed everything to raise us after Dad destroyed our family, and now he was dying too. Lily was 19 and I was 22. We'd both been planning futures that involved moving out, starting independent lives. Now we had to face losing another parent figure while Uncle Derek fought a battle he probably couldn't win. He lasted 14 months, long enough to see Lily finish her first year of college, long enough to meet my girlfriend and give his approval. When he died, Lily and I were orphans again, this time truly alone. The funeral was small, but meaningful. People came who'd known Uncle Derek before he'd become our guardian, who spoke about his kindness and sacrifice. Someone mentioned how he'd given up his retirement plans to raise his sister's children after she was murdered. The weight of what he'd done for us hit me fully, only after he was gone. We sold Uncle Derek's house and split the modest inheritance, both of us needing the fresh start. Lily transferred to a school across the country, wanting distance from everything associated with our trauma. I stayed local, finishing my psychology degree and starting graduate school for clinical counseling. Dr. Kim said I was drawn to helping others process trauma because I'd lived through my own. She was probably right about that too. Dad became eligible for parole 20 years into his sentence. Neither Lily nor I attended the hearing, but we submitted written statements opposing his release. The parole board denied him, citing the severity of his crime and his lack of genuine remorse. He'd be eligible again in 5 years. We'd submit statements again. For the rest of his life, we'd be there making sure he faced consequences. I'm 27 now, 5 years out from my clinical counseling degree and working with trauma survivors. Every client who's experienced family violence, who's lived through betrayal by someone who should have been safe, reminds me why I do this work. Mom's death wasn't meaningless if it led me to help others survive similar situations. Lily lives in California, working in theater production and doing well according to her occasional texts. We're not close anymore. Both of us too damaged by shared trauma to maintain easy connection. But we check in, make sure the other is surviving. That's enough. Last week I got a letter from Dad. It made it through somehow, past whatever filters were supposed to protect me from his contact. The envelope sat on my counter for 3 days before I opened it. Inside was a single page with 4 words. I'm sorry for everything. 25 years too late for an apology that still took no real responsibility. I burned it in my kitchen sink and washed the ashes down the drain. Some things don't deserve forgiveness, and some people don't deserve second chances. Mom never got the life she deserved, never got to escape the marriage that was killing her long before Dad actually murdered her. Lily and I survived, but we're both marked by what happened. Uncle Derek sacrificed his life to give us a chance at healing. That 3 a.m. phone call saved us from whatever Dad had planned next. I think about that sometimes, about how different things would be if Uncle Derek hadn't answered Mom's scared phone call, hadn't driven to check on her, hadn't been watching through that garage window. We were seconds away from Dad finishing his work and coming back inside. Sometimes survival is just luck and timing. Sometimes it's someone who loves you enough to drive through the night and watch your father dig a grave. I tell my clients they're survivors, not victims, and I mean it. But I also know that surviving isn't the same as being whole. We carry what happened to us forever. Learn to live with the weight instead of putting it down. And some nights, I still wake up at 3:17 a.m., my heart pounding with phantom fear, grateful for the phone call that shattered my family but saved my life. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.